Well, welcome to episode 130 of Timelines, but we're pre-show right now, just getting ready. I'm with Colonel Richard Hobbs, and we're about to start Timelines. So a couple seconds of silence. Hi out there, by the way, in YouTube land. So you gotta say hi, gotta give them a wave. Do a rocket.
Hi.
Okay, here we go. Welcome to episode 130 of Timelines. Today I have Colonel Dick Hobbs. Dick is currently living in Reno, Nevada, where I am, and he's over at my Studio C, as you can see. It's like the front room. Anyway, Colonel Hobbs, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, today we're going to talk about your timeline in the first episode, first part. I'm going to talk about your leadership principles. And then we're going to do another short episode about your speech you're going to give about radical Islam, which is going to be on Tuesday of this week for the Republican Men's Club. And again, we're recording this on the 15th of October 2015. So go ahead, tell us, first of all, I want to start by, since you're Academy grad, class of 54, sort of start there and go backwards. At what point in your life did you know you wanted to go to the Academy or become a military officer?
Well, I don't know when it was exactly, but I've been around the military since I was 9 years old. My father was called active duty in 1940, before the war. We were at Langley Field at Pearl Harbor. Then after that, he was overseas for 4 years. When he finally came back, we went to Fort Benning, Georgia. I went to high school in Columbus, Georgia. And at that time, and I was in junior ROTC, and somewhere along that line, I decided I probably might want to go to West Point. And when I graduated from high school in 1949, I went to Sullivan's Prep School in Washington, D.C. to take a civil service examination for Senator Dick Russell from Georgia for an appointment to West Point. I took that on the 11th of July, 1949, and didn't know any results for a while. So I went to Kansas City and lived with my brother, and then I went to the University of Colorado for a year. And that fall, I received a Western Union telegram that I had a principal appointment to West Point. And I traveled from Boulder, Colorado to West Point right when the war in Korea was starting on the 25th of June, 1950, and I entered West Point on the 5th of July, 1950.
So 1950, wow. So what was it like when you got the appointment to West Point, when it was actually handed to you?
Well, it was very interesting. I had to go to Fitzsimmons General Hospital to take examinations to see whether I was qualified, and also to take the physical examination to see whether I was qualified. So I did those, and didn't know the results immediately, but I started getting in shape as best I could. I hiked a lot up into the mountains every day after classes. I would take a trip back up into behind the Flatirons, beautiful rocks there at Boulder, Colorado. So I did a lot of hiking, joined the hiking club and hiked on the international or the Continental Divide. So I did that mainly for getting in shape for going to West Point.
That's very good. You still hike today? We're in Reno, Tahoe area. It's a beautiful place to hike.
I don't hike anymore, but I still do my exercises every morning before I get started. Otherwise, I'm too stiff.
Keep on moving. I'm really getting out of shape now, too. I guess I need to go do some more exercise. So going on, you're at the Academy. Of the 4 years in the Academy, what left the biggest impression?
Well, my greatest fun was in high school. I was too small. I was always very athletic, but I was too small. I couldn't play on any of the teams. When I graduated from high school, I was only 5'5", and I grew even in West Point. I'm 5'10" now. And at the end of my plebe year, I guess it was, or beginning of the second year, I played intramural lacrosse, and I got picked up for the lacrosse team. So I played lacrosse the rest of the time. And everybody that played lacrosse mainly was from Baltimore, and they knew it, and they'd been playing since they were 5 years old. I had never picked up the stick, and the whole trick of lacrosse is how to handle the stick. So I spent my time in the squash court throwing the ball back and forth, learning the stick. And by first class year, I was A squad, and I managed to make it. We played pretty well until we lost to the Navy. We were going for the national championship. I made honorable mention All-American and played in the North-South game right after graduation. So that was, to me, one of the highlights. I was able to letter and get the big A from West Point when I couldn't get anything from high school.
No, lacrosse for me was an East Coast game, especially when I was a cadet. And I remember seeing my Pat St. Pierre in his lacrosse outfit. I said, "What is that?" It's a different game, but now
it's a fantastic game because the little guy has a chance to play as well as the big guy. We used to have the football players played defense, and little guys like me could play attack. And if you could run around them and keep them from getting killed, you were all right.
It's funny. I was just asked within the last couple of weeks, what's the origin of lacrosse? Is it an American game?
It's American Indians.
American Indians.
It's the Indians, the old Iroquois Indian game that they played, and they played it pretty tough. They banged heads pretty hard.
So it's truly an American-born game.
Yes, very much.
So going on, you're at West Point. I understand you got to march in Eisenhower's inauguration.
Yes, the whole Corps went to the first inauguration in 1953, and that was impressive that Eisenhower was there. And then I graduated, and I went to the 82nd Airborne. Well, I went to Fort Benning first to normal things of basic course of the infantry because I went to the infantry. And then I went to the jump school for parachute, and then I went to the Ranger School.
Okay. Stepping back from lieutenant, I've got to ask you, you had some pretty good football teams back then. You didn't lose the Navy too much.
No, we did. It was very sad. The plebe year, 1950, we were a powerhouse in the country, and we lost to Navy 14-2.
And you're a plebe?
And I was in bad trouble. The next year was the scandal.
Oh my.
And we lost the entire football team. And so all the guys on B squad were the only ones left to play, and we lost to Navy the next 2 years. So when I was a first classman, a senior, we were kind of hungry.
Okay.
And we played hard. One of the great things was the Duke game earlier in that season, and Duke was ranked like 5th in the nation, and had an all-American halfback, and he took off downfield, and Bob Mishak, one of the great, wonderful guys, and we lost him last year. Bob Mishak caught him. When this guy crossed midfield, he was about 10 yards ahead of everybody. Mishak caught him on the 5-yard line, and Army held and beat Duke. So we were on the way. So for Navy, we were really fired up, and we had guys that we walked into Washington Hall, the mess hall, and there's this big plywood square cube. And when the Corps was all present behind tables, they let down the sides, and there was the Navy goat. So we had the Navy goat. And a bunch of my classmates had gone to Annapolis and stolen the Navy goat. And there he was in the mess hall. And of course, the mess hall went absolutely delirious. And at the game, some of the guys went in and had the signs. And in those days, they put signs which they ran down across the midshipmen or the cadets, and that like, go Army, beat Navy, or go Navy, beat Army. Well, we switched their signs, some guys did, and then the midshipmen ran a sign down with television on it. I guess we had television those days, a long time ago. And it said, go Army, beat Navy. And the midshipmen were passing down before they finally saw it, and they got all mad and threw it away. Anyway, we had raised quite a bit of trouble with the goat. In fact, it went all the way to the Secretary of Defense, and they demanded the goat be returned. And one of the guys, Ben Schemmer, classmate, then later the head of the Armed Forces Journal, got busted. And General Mike Michaelis, I guess, was the commandant. Anyway, we had a lot of trouble. But the goat had been returned, but we managed to win. They did win the football game, so that was an accomplishment.
Very good. Yeah, it's good. My plebe year, the first classman got a hold of the goat. They all got in trouble, but they got the goat, and that was the only time.
We also had a Navy ship of some sort tied up down at the North Dock, South Dock, and guys went down and painted "Beat Navy" on the side of the ship. They caught hell for that too, but they had painted "Beat Navy" right on the damn ship. So the Navy was very unhappy with us.
That's pretty good. That's what you're supposed to do. So going on, you're a lieutenant. Your first assignments. What were your first assignments? Branch was infantry.
Infantry with 82nd Airborne.
You got 82nd right out of the academy. Right out of the academy.
Yes, that's my first assignment. I got there in April of 1955.
Now, back then, you can only go into the combat arms, right?
Yes.
When you graduate, unless there's something physically wrong with you. What were they available back then? Armor, infantry?
Engineers.
Engineers.
Yes.
And
artillery.
And you didn't have air defense yet, I don't think.
Yes, they did. I think we did have air defense artillery.
In signal, you had signal. Did you go in signal?
Yes, Hillsman went into signal.
So
Yeah, so we did have signal.
So
But you didn't have AG or any of those
No.
others. And we didn't have medical school at the time, but it started a little bit later when a couple of guys then took a leave of absence and went to medical school and then came back on active duty.
they still do strange things when it comes to medical school. and
Yeah,
how you
they're
get to
still
go.
doing it.
You have to be the very top of your class, that's for sure.
Well, it's an interesting thing. It's
So
another subject.
why did you choose infantry?
I actually was going to go in the Air Force. The Air Force didn't like me. They didn't like my eyes.
Army Air Corps back then still, right?
No, it was the Air
It was
Force.
57 maybe.
It was
Okay.
47 was the Air
47,
Force.
47 right.
I was going to go in the Air Force because I'd been at Langley Field, but then I'd been at Fort Benning and I knew the jump towers and I knew everything at Fort Benning. I'd lived there for 3 years and had a lot of fun. So I went back to my original love, which was the infantry.
Mhm.
And so that's why I took infantry. I graduated high in the class. I could have taken anything, but I wanted to be with the infantry.
That's how you got the 82nd too.
And I got my choice. That was my first choice with the 82nd Airborne.
Yeah.
And I went up there and commanded a platoon. Then I was an instructor at the Chemical, Biological, and Warfare School. And then we had a shift of officers because of sending 11th Airborne to Germany. And I was suddenly the battalion operations officer, a major's job when I was still a first lieutenant. But we had a lot of fun, and we ran a good battalion.
So you're in battalion. So what happened? What's your next step? You're a lieutenant?
Well, then
battalion?
I've got orders to go to Hawaii, and my battalion commander was designated to prepare a composite battalion of the 82nd Airborne to go to Ike's second inauguration. And since I was on the way out, he said, "You prepare the battalion." So we had 800 troopers from every unit in the division, every unit. And it was 16 wide and 50 ranks deep, 800 troops, which is a very tough outfit to march. And I got a lot of supervision. I had a major general, a brigadier general, a colonel, and a lieutenant colonel all telling me how to march this battalion. So I had much supervision. We went to Fort Belvoir, prepared the battalion, marched in the second inauguration of President Eisenhower. It was very, very cold, but when we passed in review, Ike took his hat off to the 82nd Airborne. He still loved them from World War II.
Certainly. The 101st and the 82nd.
Yes, he loved both of those divisions.
Very good. So going on, I'm going to go forward a little bit. The Korean War is over, of course. It's sort of that.
I'm in that dead space between wars. I'm young and non-combat, and there's nothing else. And I'm a dumb lieutenant, where the other guys in front of me all were Korean vets, and so I'm just the dumb novice. And that goes on for almost 10 years.
And a lot of the junior officers behind you had been enlisted, even from West Point, had been enlisted.
A lot of capability. So 3 years in Hawaii. Interesting thing there, because I was 6 years as a lieutenant. Took a long time to make captain in those days. And I had been a company executive officer for a great deal, which is good training because I had every job. I was platoon leader, I was exec, I was mess officer, motor officer, all the jobs that you learn about how to handle an organization like that. And I took command of a company because the captain was gone somewhere, and that was battle groups in those days. And the battle group commander said, lieutenants are too stupid to command a company. And he even raised hell and got a captain from Fort Shafter down in Honolulu. And then he gave me the booby prize. He sent me to Malaya to the British Jungle School because the battle group was designated to run tropical training for the year. And that after that. So I took off across the Pacific, all the way down to Singapore, and then went up into Kota Tinggi for the Far Elf Land Training Center, the British area, up in the jungle of Malaya, and went through their British Jungle School. That was a combat time because it was the communist terrorists that were operating there. So when we were on patrol, we carried ball ammunition, and when we ran a practice, we turned in the ball ammunition, drew blanks, ran that, turned the blanks in, drew ball, and went back out again. So that was good. I went back to Hawaii and ran tropical training, which was the best job in the country, in the world at that time. I mean, I had a beautiful show that we put on at the beginning, sort of like the Mad Minute. I had rappelling and everything going, explosions.
What year was this?
This is in 1958.
Oh, early. Still very early.
1958. And I had all the TV people, anybody that came through Honolulu, and the people down at Honolulu wanted to show off to something. They sent him up to Hawaii, up to Schofield Barracks to see the tropical training. So we'd put on a show for them. So I had TV stars and movie stars and all these other people. Then at the end of that, oh, well, we'll get to this in another thing. At the end of that, I became the aide to the assistant division commander, General Ash Manhart. And on Labor Day of 1959, on 4 hours notice, we went to Japan because he was to be the Army component commander of a Joint Task Force 116, which would go into a place that no one had ever heard of called Laos. And we sat in Iwakuni, Japan for 6 weeks, and we did not go into Laos, fortunately. But we were going down to Okinawa to visit the troops, including special forces that you know down there. And
that's what they, yeah. First special
and
forces.
I got a message that I had a special delivery letter in the post office. Well, we were leaving at 6 in the morning and the post office wasn't open, and I had to get a Marine and force him to open the post office and give me this letter. And I opened it on the airplane and showed it to the general, and it had come from the Deputy Chief of Staff of Personnel in the Pentagon. Well, they don't usually write letters to lieutenants. And so we read this letter, and it said, you've been nominated for a scholarship, a new scholarship called the Olmstead Scholarship.
Yep, Olmsted's still there.
And what it was is it had been mailed on the 1st of September, and this was the 29th of September, and your reply is due in Washington before the 30th. Fortunately, my wife back in Schofield Barracks had thought that maybe this letter was important coming from the Pentagon, and she had sent it special delivery because I only had that one day. And the general said, well, as soon as we land, you go get it, because you had to tell them whether you were interested, what language you wanted to study, what school, what university you wanted to go to, in what country, and what country. So he said, go to the library and bone up on it, and we'll get a message off. So we got a message off to the Pentagon on the 30th, and that changed my life because I was selected as an Olmstead Scholar to go to the University of Lyon in France.
So you studied French, of course, spoke French.
So we left Hawaii early. I just extended, and we left Hawaii early to go to the language school. So we went to
DLI, still DLI.
This was no, it was the Army language school then at Presidio of Monterey in California. Presidio of Monterey.
Right. Monterey. I guess.
Yeah,
same place now.
We studied French for 6 months, and
nice.
Part of the scholarship was brilliant because it was patterned after the Rhodes Scholarship, except that it was to be outside the English-speaking world. Mm-hmm. You had to go to a school where it was not English. And my wife had never studied a foreign language, so she was taking the course too, because General Olmstead insisted that the spouse also brilliantly and had to know the language also. So she was in there, she was in the Army language school learning about barbed wire and the vulnerable points of a tank and all these important things for her to go to France. But at that point, Rick Brown from class of 56 was the other Army scholar with me, and this was something new because the Army was receiving money rather than giving money. They didn't know how to receive money. So we said we ought to go to advanced course first while they sort this out. So he went to Fort Knox and I went to Fort Benning to the advanced course. Then we left in the summer of. You've
been how many years? 10 years or so?
This was 1960.
60. So 6 years. Okay, that's okay.
So
we started doing that today.
So I left the language school and I went to the Pathfinder course at Fort Benning, and then I stayed on the Pathfinder committees. I stayed in the airborne department until the course started, the advanced course, and then the next summer of '61, we went to France, and we started a great adventure. because what General Olmstead had done, and we had the pleasure of going and spending time with General Olmstead on the way. And he required, that, but he provided money. And that was so that you could entertain your professors and your peers and travel. He wanted you to travel. Wherever you were, go as far as you could go. And so we had a ball. It was a lot of fun, and we traveled extensively. We had no children at that time, so we could pick up and go. And we were in Lyon, which was not too far from Grenoble, so we could go skiing, and we learned to ski. My wife didn't even know what snow was, but she found out about it, and she learned to ski in French. So,
right. I can relate to that. Believe it or not, I've been all over Europe, never been in France, but the military embedded me with a French unit for almost a year in Afghanistan. And they said, oh, you don't have to know French that well. And I knew basic French, but all our briefs were in French. So I had to learn French real fast on the job, OJT. But my unit was the Armor, 2nd Armor, which I think you know where they're located. I think they're in the south, in that area, pretty close. So anyway, interesting thing. So what happened after that? When you got done, by the way, by 1962, we had the Bay of Pigs. That was a major incident.
Oh yeah, this was a very nervous time in Europe. In fact, Rick Brown and I had our escape routes all planned out and placed at rendezvous points where we would leave messages behind the road markers or behind signs for a store, a city on the way to Spain that we could get out. We had our route planned to get out of Europe if war were to break up. People don't remember that we were under threat of nuclear war in those years. It was hairy, but we had fun. It was a great time. And at the end of, then I got orders to Berlin. Well, I'd been out of the country for 5 years, considering Hawaii being out of the country. And so I went up to Paris and hitchhiked on a Air Force plane to Washington to go to the Pentagon to argue about, I didn't want to go. I wanted to go to Vietnam because Vietnam had started. And I already had classmates in there. 62, 63, we had people in Vietnam. We had advisors.
General Powell was there. That's American group.
That's later.
Okay, later.
That's a little early. We didn't have any troops yet. And so I went in and I talked to my assignment officer, and then I wanted to talk to his boss. Everybody said, no, you got to go command a company. Well, they'd taken the company away from me when I was a lieutenant, so now you got to go command a company. Yes, okay. I said, I want to see the boss. I went to see General Jabo Jablonski, who was the chief of infantry, major general, about size of a fire plug, used to play left guard on the regimental football teams. And I went in to see the general, and he said, you're going to go command a company. I said, sir, I want to go to Vietnam. He said, no, you're going to command a company. I said, General, as I recall, you spent a lot of time in the airborne. He rose up out of his chair, opened the door, slammed it open, going across the hall in the E-ring of the Pentagon, opened the door to the other side where the offices were, and said, send this bastard wherever he wants to go. It's 82nd Airborne. So I went back to the 82nd Airborne, went on the big operation in Sagebrush, and then I was commanding a company. 6 months to the day, they took the company away from me again. We had a great company. We were great then. Delta Company, the 325. I'd been in the 505 the first time.
505.
So back to Washington. I went up to Washington and said, I want to go to Vietnam. No, you can't go to Vietnam. It's only by name request. I said, you'll have a name request here in a few days, because my battle group commander had just gone to Vietnam to be the senior advisor to the Vietnamese Airborne Brigade. So I got a word off to him, and he put in, and pretty soon I had orders for Vietnam in April of 1964. Okay. So I went to Vietnam, started out in their little bitty course. He yanked me out of it because they were going on an operation. So I was right in the middle of combat very quickly in 1964. I was with the Vietnamese 6th Airborne Battalion at Vung Tau, old Cap San Jacques, down on the South China Sea. So we went a lot of operations all up and down the country. I operated in the Delta. When they got the attacks on the destroyers, we went up to Da Nang in case there was any invasion of the north. We tried to plan an airborne operation up there in the Ashau Valley. It was a little too cruddy. I walked through the Ashau Valley. It is cruddy. It is really cruddy. Sometimes we couldn't go 100 yards cutting through all that stuff in an hour. And finally went back. And then General Westmoreland, I finally got promoted to major. The Vietnamese, we had a ball at a restaurant up in Da Nang. And General Westmoreland had said, Colonel, get this guy out of here. He's in the wrong grade for this job. That's a captain's job. So I was slated to go to MACV, and I didn't want to be a pencil pusher as a brand new major. And a classmate of mine was the aide to General Throckmorton, who was the deputy commander of MACV, Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, under General Westmoreland. And he was a pilot and wanted to go up to the aviation battalion. And the general wouldn't release him until he got a replacement. So I'd been an aide before, but I said, okay, I'll do it. So I went to work for General Throckmorton. The day I flew into Saigon was the 14th of October of 1964, which was the day the Chinese exploded their nuclear weapon. So I started off on a good thing. We had a great time. General Throckmorton was an absolute jewel. He'd been the commanding general of the 82nd Airborne with me. Westmoreland had been the CG, the 18th Airborne Corps. And so I had a great time with General Throckmorton. I spent at the end of the tour, I went back for the last month with the task force of the Airborne Brigade before I went then to West Point to join the faculty Department of Social Sciences as an instructor.
Take a break. Did you go back to school? Because you already had your master's.
Well, I had gotten what they had called a French doctorate, doctorat de l'université. Okay. So it worked out very nicely. Going back to the University of Lyon, when I got in there, they didn't know what to do with an American. I was the only American in the school, I think, a great big university. And so they called for Professor Jacques Cadar to come deal with me because he had gone to the United States in 1920 and driven out across the United States on dirt roads. So he was their expert on America. Mm-hmm. So he came and talked to me, and we talked a while. And I told him, well, if I didn't go on this scholarship, I was going to go to Harvard to get the training to go to West Point. So he said, oh, well, then we'll put you in the doctorate program. We're going to give you credit for a master's in the licence, which is actually higher than the American master's. So they gave me credit for that and put me in the doctorate program. So I spent the whole second year writing a thesis, which was the myth of victory. What is victory in war? It was La Grande Illusion, la victoire totale, because it was all in French.
So what is victory in war?
It's a myth. It's a myth, a very expensive myth that we pursue. So anyway, that was fun. And
well, World War II, there's definitely a victory in World War II.
Very expensive victory.
Oh yeah, to the world.
Well, we lost. Well, that's another subject we can get into.
Yeah, we don't want to get too much. This is your timeline, so.
Yeah, we're gonna run out of time here.
So we'll finish. Keep on going here. So you're at West Point. You're teaching.
I taught social sciences, and the last year I was the assistant professor in charge of social sciences, and that was good. This was the period right in the middle of the Vietnam War, so the students were very interested.
Well, now were you looking at anthropology back then? What type of social sciences?
No, I was teaching international relations.
Apologize. I thought that would do that. Keep on going. We have a remote site, an old system I'm using. That's a laptop, an Apple laptop, and
oh, that's all right.
I thought I turned all our systems off. But we'll keep on driving on. We keep on going. That was Murphy just trying to get involved.
Murphy's always after us. So anyway, yeah, I taught social sciences, and that was fun. I gave a number of speeches around the country, and one in particular I went to Michigan State, and this was in about '68. And they had never seen somebody in uniform. This was at the height of the rioting and the disgust with the Vietnam War. And I gave my talk, and then I asked for questions. And I sat down on the front of the stage of the auditorium, and I was still there at midnight talking to these young folks. And they were good. I mean, it was great. And then after that, I went to Fort Leavenworth, to the Commanding General Staff College, and then I returned to Vietnam to command a battalion. I started out as a battalion brigade executive officer, finally took over the 2nd of the 28th Infantry.
So what year was this?
1969.
After Tet. Okay.
After Tet.
So
1969. So I commanded a battalion, and it was fun. A lot of fun, great troops, even though they were draftees. They were great troops.
You lost guys though too, didn't you?
Hmm?
You lost folks.
Not very many.
Really, in your battalion, you didn't lose them.
Not very many.
That's good.
I removed a whole lot of Viet Cong, Boku Viet Cong, and I didn't lose very many. Very
good.
proud of that. I did not lose very many troops. And then at the end of that, I was in the Vietnamization program, Dong Tien, and we were taking care of rice and doing all these things.
Corps back then? Was it corps?
Well, you had corps, but this was the Dong Tien program, was the Vietnamization. And the violation of military principle is we put 2 infantry battalions, one American, one Vietnamese, in the same area of operation with no boundary. This violates everything, which we made it work. You know, I mean, on my fire base, half the fire base was American, half the fire base perimeter was Vietnamese. I used to walk that perimeter at night. You learn a lot when you walk in the dark. Mm-hmm. And people don't know. I would walk up and sit down by troops and listen to their complaints and their nasty comments and about that stupid battalion commander. And you learn a lot about what's really going on. You got to learn from the troops. That's where you find the truth. And it would be fun. So I used to walk the perimeter at night, talk and listen to the troops.
I've seen generals at crossroads in the rain with their aide just standing there in the middle of the night. I've seen that. Wow, in boonies, you just come to a crossroad and there's a general standing there. I've seen that firsthand.
Well, that's great.
It must be something stopped for the old guys, because
well, yeah, okay. But anyway, after the battalion, we were starting to withdraw the troops, and my battalion was one of the first to be withdrawn, and so now I'm out of a job, and so they sent me as an advisor to the 7th Infantry Regiment of the 5th Division of Vietnamese regiment. So now I'm with the Vietnamese regiment. Still I was operating in the Iron Triangle, which I had spent much time in the Iron Triangle. So I knew it pretty well, and I was still working there. At the end of that, then I came home and I was assigned to Deputy Chief of Staff of Operations, was General Stilwell, that I had known in Vietnam earlier, and I was working in the Pentagon, and I was working in the International Directorate of Dassaults. I spent some time there. Then I was selected to go to the War College, and I didn't go to the War College. I became an Army Research Associate and went to the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, which had been created by Admiral Arleigh Burke, 31 Knot Burke. Wonderful gentleman. I spent a lot of time with him, and so spent that year. Then I went back to the Pentagon to the Deputy Undersecretary of the Army, where I handled military assistance and foreign military sales. Spent a couple years there. We got into the 1973 war in the Middle East with Israel, and I was heavily involved in all the things that were going on with Israel because of the foreign military sales and deliveries and so on. So then when they needed somebody to replace the colonel in the State Department, I went over as the political military advisor of the Middle East Bureau of Near East and South Asian Affairs in the Department of State, and worked on foreign military sales and things like that. And stayed there until I retired at the end of December of 1977.
Full-bird colonel?
As a full colonel.
So where were you? Where physically were you for that assignment?
Those 3 years I was at the State Department.
Yeah, what physically in Washington?
In Washington. Yeah. Oh, in the Middle East Bureau.
In the Middle East Bureau, okay.
I was the political military advisor all the time. The director of that time was Roy Atherton, who I later worked with in Egypt.
Now, with your social science background and that assignment, I can see where you are today. And that's we'll sort of bring this up and finish up your biography. So after you got out, what did you do? What were your next jobs?
Then I had been briefing the ambassador designate to Morocco, and he wanted me to go along as his defense attaché. The Marines fought it gallantly and blocked it. And so they said, well, you can go to Tunisia. I said, no, I don't want to do it. So then you can retire. I said, okay. So I retired.
Okay. 27 years, about?
27 and a half, 28 years. And so Admiral Ray Pete, who was the head of the Defense Security Assistance Agency in the Pentagon, said, well, you ought to go meet the people out at Teledyne in California. Mm-hmm. So he got me an appointment. I went out to meet the president of Teledyne, George Roberts, Dr. George Roberts, great man. And he said, hey, you can come in here anytime. What am I going to do? He said, I don't know. He said, I'll find something that's interesting to you and valuable to me. I went back to Washington, thought about it. Called him up. I said, I don't know. I went back out to California. He said the same thing. Anytime, you start right away. I said, okay, I'll be here 1st of November. So I went out there and I spent 6 months with Dr. Roberts. My wife had told me if I ever went off on a short tour again, I was finished. So, but she told me, go ahead and go. And he sent me around. Teledyne at that time had 130 companies. So I sat in on all the meetings and he sent me out to visit the different companies. So I would tour around the United States. And he said, well, just work your program so you work your way through Washington on the way back to Los Angeles. So I would go with different companies and spend the weekend in Washington, get home to the family, and then take the red eye to LA on Sunday night and arrive at 6 in the morning and be in the office at 8, and I did that for 6 months. And then I said, well, you can move out here. I said, my wife came out and looked at housing and said, oh, this is ridiculous. We'd be about 3 valleys out before you could pay for it. And so he said, oh, then you stay in Washington, operate from Washington. Well, in my last years in the State Department, we had reestablished relations with Egypt. And President Sadat sent an attaché over. And the first attaché was a Major General of Mohammed Abu Ghazala. And he used to entertain it because part of my job in the State Department, I dealt with all the attachés from that area. So I knew all the different attachés. And I knew General Abu Ghazala because he used to have us over at his home. We had parties and all. He was a lot of fun guy. So when I retired, he had gone home to be, and was named the Chief of Staff of the Army. About a week later, or a short time later, the Minister of Defense was killed in a helicopter crash. Sadat made him the Minister of Defense. So here was the guy that I now knew, the Minister of Defense of Egypt personally, and could call him up, but I couldn't talk to Cap Weinberger, but I could call the Minister of Defense of Egypt. So I certainly had a value to Teledyne because we were doing work over there. So I went to Egypt every 3 months for the next 10 years. And there's some interesting stories. I don't know how far you want to go with all this with time. But anyway, I spent 10 years with Teledyne, then established my own consulting company, which I moved to Reno in 1991.
So what about you? I got to ask you, why'd you come to Reno?
My wife. I wanted to get out of Washington. I was tired of Washington. I've been there for 20 years. And she didn't want to go anywhere. She finally agreed to get out of Washington. So I took her down to Lake Lure, North Carolina. Beautiful spot. No. Went down to Florida. No. Too humid. Went to Austin, Texas. No. Went to New Mexico. Great art place. My wife's an art. No.
Santa Fe, maybe?
Santa Fe. She came to Tahoe with some family and went skiing. She said, I like to go to Tahoe. I said, no way I'm going to go to Tahoe with all that snow. But I made a fatal mistake. I said, but I could probably live in Reno. I died right there, and it was over.
We're at 5,000.
That was it. That was it. So we sold our house. We actually bought the house here in Reno. It was over on the other side by Sparks. And we packed up and moved out here in 1991. And of course, that was right at the time of in 1990 was the Kuwait invasion.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So when we got here, it was the beginning of the short war, the 100 hours war.
Yep.
in Kuwait. So, and I've been here ever since, and I love it. This is paradise.
Reno is nice. It's sort of a little secret, good, healthy weather.
It's a nice place, and
you can drive to California in a couple hours over the hill.
If you really want to go to the left coast, you can go over there anytime you want.
Stay down at Monterey. You can go stay in the quarters of Monterey.
I have, and then I stay in the Arleigh Burke suite, which is fun. Arleigh Burke was such a wonderful. He wrote the thesis that I wrote in France. I then got published as the Myth of Victory, and Arleigh Burke wrote a 5-page foreword to it, which is just a beautiful piece.
Now I haven't read that. I'll have to look at it. Now you've also written a book.
Well, then I wrote several books after that. I came out here originally to teach at the University of Nevada, Reno.
Mm-hmm. Great story.
And by the time I got here, they had gotten another person in there and didn't really have any. I did end up teaching some courses, international relations for the students and for some graduate students, but they never had any money for full time. I built a computer. I worked in a company. I was president of a export company for a short time. And then we built a computer, and then we gave up all that. So I started writing some books, and I wrote You and the New World Order, which I went to 100 publishers and couldn't get it published, so I published it myself. Then some years later, I got more involved with the Islamic world and the problems facing that. And so I wrote a book on World War IV and beyond, Islamofascism, the Third Jihad, and other threats to the United States. After that, I went to Death by a Thousand Cuts, Fiscal Irresponsibility, Islam, and other threats to USA.
When did you fiscal irresponsibility? When did you do that?
That would be in 2012.
12, wow.
And we were really in deep trouble.
I spent a ton of money over there in Afghanistan when I was a lieutenant colonel, was
Well,
second tour.
That's not the only
tour.
place we've blown money. We've blown
Ton
a
of
lot
money.
of money, and we've blown a lot more. I mean, when we're so far in debt that there's no way to pay it off, so we're going to dump that on our children.
So,
I wrote one more book after that, and then I decided that those books were all of the problems. Then I wanted to focus on Islam. I did Radical Islam. Do we want dhimitude, which is a very third class? Do we want to be third class citizens, slaves, or do we want to be free, and it's our choice? And then the last book, which is current, which we're going to talk about next Tuesday, is Islam versus Civilization, the Great War of the 21st Century.
very good. And I want to do a separate short little show following up about 10 minutes about that conversation so we can put it out before the Tuesday.
Okay.
Let's go real fast. Second part of this is about leadership principles. And we're going to go over your 7 leadership principles. I want to read those real fast. Set the example, take care of the troops, take responsibility. 4 is keep the troops informed. 5 is loyalty. Loyalty both directions, I'm sure.
Yes.
Listen, what's this? Listen, and then you put auto ambush, which is something.
That's an example I'll give you.
Okay. And then take care of the families. Those are 7 wonderful principles. So let's go over them. Set the example, 1.
Well, infantry is not about equipment, like armor is about tanks and artillery is about guns. Infantry is about people. And so you start with the people. And to do that, to tell someone to go out on something that might get him killed, he's got to have faith in you. He's got to believe you. Why is this knucklehead telling me to charge into a machine gun when I might get killed? You have to love this guy, or at least respect him to the point that you will take orders. You're not going to shoot him. That's Russian or German style in World War II. You're not going to shoot him if he disobeys. He's going to go because he has faith in your orders. And my main thing in Vietnam, and I always told him, said, my first mission is to get you on that airplane back to Travis Air Force Base in California, because that's where they flew in and out. And therefore, every life was precious. You never wanted to lose one of those troops. And they were wonderful troops. It's a fun story. This was the time of the beads and flower children and all this nonsense. And I had hat bands around the camouflage on the helmets with all the kind of crap written on them. And I would chew them out and chew the hell out of them. But I didn't make them take it off. And so, this is draftees. And they were great soldiers. They didn't want to be there. They hadn't volunteered for it. But when they were there, and they did it. So you set the example. Now, one example for that is in the infantry unit, I fired expert on every weapon of the infantry unit. I figured if the troops expect me to tell them what to do, I need to know every piece of equipment in this company. And so I fired expert on every weapon. So I loved the troops, and that's the whole point. You've got to have this enormous relationship with the troops. And the motto of the infantry is follow me.
Right. I do have one question. I thought about this often. What makes a young soldier, who let's say has a family, a very young soldier, has a family, run against a machine gun or some imminent danger where they're probably going to get killed?
He does it for his buddy. The infantry becomes a family. The family is the man next to you, the guy on your other side, the men in the fire team. You would do anything to protect him, the other 3-4 guys. You give your life for them. You talk about the guys that jump on a grenade. What's he doing that for? he's protecting the other guys. That is really the ultimate love of any human being.
So number 2, take care of the troops. That's sort of
take care of the troops. You take care of the troops, and they'll take care of you. And everything is about the soldier in the infantry. I mean, he's a foot soldier. So instead of taking care of tank tracks, you're taking care of feet. And you literally do inspect feet in the infantry. You take the socks off and check the feet, because if they can't walk, they can't fight. And so you do that. You take care of the troops. You make sure they're fed. You try to get them some rest. You try to get them their ammunition and this sort of thing. Like as a battalion commander, it was a platoon and company war at that time where I was in the Iron Triangle. So I would go on the ground, but when I was on the ground, I'm a nuisance. I'm in the way of the company commander. So my best position was in a helicopter over top of him, not giving him orders, but I was bringing in airstrikes. I was bringing in artillery. I was bringing in ammunition, food, and water, and reinforcements, or whatever he needed. I was taking care of him, what the platoon leader, or in my case, what the company commander needed. That was my mission.
That's good. That's very good. So 3 is take responsibility.
You got to be responsible. You can't pass the buck to somebody else. If you give an order and it goes bad, you can't start blaming people. It's your responsibility. You're responsible for everything that company or battalion or platoon does or doesn't do. And you got to be able to just stand up and say, I did it, sir. This is why, and I'm responsible.
Now, in the civilian world, you had the 10 years plus in the civilian world, plus as a professor. How did you see taking responsibility evolve? What's the biggest difference in the military and the civilian side?
The civilian world is not as interested in taking responsibility. They would like to slough it off on somebody else, if possible.
I can understand that. Little war story here. I just called a big company, which I do spend $200 a month for some high-level technical work. And they were blaming their employees, and it was a younger person. At first, I just pounded them. I said, "So you're blaming your employee instead of the company. It's the company's system is supposed to provide the work. Not
there you go.
Can't blame anybody, can you? You got to take responsibility and just get it done. Sort of like no excuse, sir. Remember,
no excuse, sir.
Did you have the 4 answers back in the ancient
Yes,
days?
sir. No, sir, and no excuse, sir. The only answers available.
Keep the troops informed.
Well, if they're going to do things, they're entitled to know why. I mean, if we're going to go charging down this road and I want them to go fast and I want them to move and it's in the middle of the night, why, sir? Well, what the hell for? You got to tell them why. And if they know why, then they will usually understand what you've told them. And they will then respect it and do it. But if they don't know why, then they're questioning, what the hell is this idiot doing, you know?
All the way down, you got to inform. So loyalty, number 5.
Both directions. You got to stand up for your troops against the next higher commander who may be doing something stupid and putting them on a mission that they're not capable of doing or is too dangerous or something. And likewise, you've got to be loyal to your commander for what your outfit is doing. So it goes both ways. It goes up and down. You've got to be loyal. The mission is always first, but the troops are right there with that. You've got to make the troops and the mission combine to accomplish both. So that's the key to loyalty.
I've got a little loyalty story. 10 Special Forces, I'm a first lieutenant going to 10th after being in the infantry a couple of years. I show up with Colonel Potter, who became General Potter, at my group briefing from him. All he asked me was one question. He said, have you ever cheated on your wife? That's all I wanted to know. And I said, no. And I said, well, bottom line, if you haven't cheated on your wife, or if someone cheats on their wife, I can't trust them. And that's where loyalty starts.
That's integrity and honesty. And
right.
Honesty is the most important thing we have for an officer. That if an officer tells you I'm at a certain grid coordinates and he's not there, then that can cost people lives. And so it is critical to have that integrity.
I remember a lot of the captains and young officers sat around and talked about Colonel Potter and his little speech that he would always give. It was standard. And you never know it till you got there, because that's the first place you went when you reported in. So loyalty. So listening. Number 6.
Listen to your officers, listen to your non-coms, listen to your troops. An example. Late in 69, we had killed, hundreds. I think I was leading the division, was like 600 we had knocked off of VC. And then everything went quiet. They pulled out of the area and we couldn't get a contact. I couldn't find any VC. I put the entire battalion on 5-man ambush patrols. Now that was not very popular. Not popular at all. Troops really did not like that. And one of the troops, somebody, I don't remember whom, but somebody came up with a brilliant idea. We had the Claymore mines, as you might know, which is a mine that blows out. And this person came up with that idea. He said, okay, we put a tripwire and we use a clothespin. I mean, it was real high-tech stuff, clothespin. And the C rations came with a white plastic spoon. And you cut that in half and you had a little piece of plastic. You put that in the clothespin on the tripwire and you encircled the patrol with clip wires. And I said, good. I said, this is great. I said, now you can all go to sleep. Because, they're working all day, they're walking all day in the jungle, they're tired, and it's hard to stay awake in the pitch dark in the jungle. I said, you can go to sleep as long as you put that Claymore ambush, which we call the automatic ambush, around them. And that came about from listening to the troops, somebody who had a good idea. And it doesn't hurt to listen. You're not the smartest guy in the world. There are other people who have some ideas, and it pays to listen.
That Claymore example brings back memories too. In 77, 76, when I was going through my initial training at West Point, they're still teaching that in the summer camps with a spoon.
Really?
The tripwire, yeah.
Fantastic.
The ambush is still using the spoon, and in special forces, you're still using the spoon.
Fantastic.
And we're in small groups, and we'd set up something very similar to that. So that's what you call the auto ambush.
Automatic ambush.
Automatic ambush. We had the L ambush. It's scary. We still try to keep one person up at night. In small groups.
Well, it's hard to stay awake. If you've been walking all day and you're tired, you're always tired in combat. God, you never get a decent night's sleep. And the poor guys, and you want them to stay awake.
It is hard. You need sleep. Commanders need sleep too. We can talk about that. They've done a lot of research on sleep. Everyone needs sleep.
Absolutely. And you're really demanding a lot when you want that guy to stay awake. And okay, this was a great solution because I said, go to sleep.
That's good.
And boom. We blew away more VC with this thing than we did earlier.
It's just opposite what you do in Ranger School. Ranger School is 58
Oh, yeah. Well, they were
days,
trying to beat you down. I mean, they were trying to beat you to death. So
I got to ask you this question since you're a Ranger School graduate. War compared to Ranger School, what were the differences?
Ranger's tougher.
I agree. Except probably you survive out of Ranger School. Maybe not. We've killed people from time to time. But Ranger School physically is.
But it's the best. It's the best training for the infantry in the whole Army.
Hardest thing I ever did in my life, in my life, not West Point, is Ranger School. Physically on your body, on demand, on sleep.
I had fun. I was writing letters to a redheaded lady and arranging for a wedding.
Oh no.
Because yes, you want to talk about a crazy man. We were on patrol in Foxville. I'm writing letters to this woman. I'd left my car at her house, and she had gone with a friend to California. And she called when I was in the mountains in Dahlonega. She called collect to Dahlonega. And I don't know if you ever knew him, but Captain Bob Kingston.
Name's familiar.
4-star general.
Yep.
Bob Kingston was my TAC. And he accepted the charges from this crazy woman calling from California for Ranger Hobbs. And he connected me through a EE8 telephone on a field wire to talk to this woman. And she said, you want me to come back? And I said, yes, come back. Okay. So we're going to get married, and we were scheduled to get married on the 31st of March of 1955. I graduated from Ranger School that morning.
Oh my. And
had to clear post.
Shaved head.
And be at the post chapel at Fort Benning at 4 o'clock, and I arrived at 1559.9999. I arrived at 1600 at the Post Chapel. We got married, got in the car, and went to Florida, and on the way to Fort Bragg in the 82nd Airborne.
So did you have your classmates at the wedding? I've been in weddings at that chapel.
Well, my best man was my roommate from West Point.
And you have
and he had just graduated from Ranger School with us at the same time.
Well, you did better than me. My girlfriend from high school, who I went through West Point with on and off, she broke up with me while I was in Ranger School. When I got out and shaved head, that's like the last time I saw her, I think. So you did better with just 180 out, but it worked out well for me. I met a beautiful.
Yeah, we've been married 60 years.
60 years.
60 years.
Wow.
Last 31st.
Is she from California originally?
No, Columbus.
She's from Columbus. Oh, you met her down in Columbus. And
Columbus,
she's from
Georgia.
Columbus.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That that's Fort
The
Benning.
infantry marries in the South.
Yep, that's true. Well, all the military bases
are in the South.
Or the big ones are in the South with the guys. A lot of big bases in the South. That's very true. Very, very true. So take care of the family. That's good. That's a good way to finish up on.
Well, particularly now. In the old days, we had the barracks full of soldiers. I don't think they have the barracks full of many soldiers now because so many of them are married. And
you haven't been back to Fort Bragg lately. There's a lot, at least to see what the barracks look like now. They're nice.
Well, I remember the new
nice.
barracks. I started out in the World War II barracks.
Yeah, but the new ones are.
And then I went to the big barracks.
It's really
when I had a company, it was in the big barracks.
You got a private bathroom between two soldiers.
Well, no, we had bay. We still had bays because we had most of the soldiers in the draftee army were not married, whereas now with the volunteer army, a very high percentage are married. So you have every soldier has a spouse almost, and you have to take care of them. And because if the spouse is unhappy, that soldier is going down fast because she'll drive him out of the army or make his life miserable that he won't be very productive as a soldier. I'll give you a good example. When I was running tropical training at the 25th Division in Hawaii, we invited all of the wives to come out and see what their husbands were doing. And we had them rappelling down the hill cliffs and going over the suspension traverse and weaving hats out of palm fronds and things like that, so that they could see what their husbands were doing. And I think that's very important. Nowadays, communications are a lot better. When I was in Vietnam, I talked to my wife twice in 2 years, I think, because I had to go over to get on the amateur radio system to call. I was blown out of the Brink BOQ on Christmas Eve of 1964 when the Brink blew up, and my wife had a miserable time. I couldn't reach her, but I was at MACV headquarters. I knew what information was going out as who was killed and who was wounded. And the bad story is that my room was all blown. I was working with General Throckmorton. He heard the explosion. He buzzed me and said, "What the hell was that?" I called the command center. "Well, the Brink just blew up." He said, "Don't you live in the Brink?" "Yes, sir." "Get the car." So we went down to the Brink. My room was a mess. My door was across my bed. All the glass from the door, the French doors had blown across and was everywhere. If I'd been in that room, I would have been full of glass if alive. He said, "Grab your stuff." And he took me over and I went to his quarters and stayed there until I moved into the airborne quarters. But I picked up it was Christmas Eve, literally. It was 5 minutes of 6, 25th of December. Picked up my few Christmas presents and went across to the Continental Hotel to a lieutenant colonel who had been with me at the 82nd. And his wife was in town because she was a writer for the Army Times. And so we went over there and she wrote an article in the Army Times about this young major came in carrying his Christmas presents. And so my wife saw that and about died. She was unhappy anyway because she had a miserable night for Christmas Eve because she didn't know anything and I couldn't reach her. Nowadays, the communications are a lot different.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I'm able to get a text off to my wife or family anytime after any incident we're not supposed to. In fact, they shut down the email systems after something happens, but we try to get something off.
Yeah, they even got Skype now. You can
there's all sorts of ways. Yeah,
fantastic.
I actually know of an incident where a soldier was killed while Skyping his family. Around just went through the wooden door and hit him. Bad.
Get to watch your husband killed, huh?
So I mean,
how nice.
The only time, but it's a different kind of war. The war today is
No.
one impression of the difference in war. I remember hitting Bagram Airfield and going in a big tent and seeing all the young troops with laptops and playing games at night. That's a different kind of war when you have a laptop. So
Yes.
it's really
It's
changed.
a different world, yes.
Well, Colonel Dobbs, thank you for coming on Timeline today. What's the easiest way the listener can find you and get a hold of you?
Well, the easiest way is to go to coldoc.com. That's COLDOC.com. And there you have all my different books and a number of articles. And with each book, you have the picture of the book, the cover. You have the contents, and you have the preface. And then there's something about the author, about my background. And then I have the first chapter of each book on there. So at coldoc.com, you can see the various books.
Very good. So that's the easiest way.
That's the easiest way. And if they want to reach me, I'm at coldoc@coldoc.com.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you for coming on. I've appreciated your time, your service to country and duty.
Thank
and
you.
Longevity, and congratulations with your 60 years of marriage in the military. That really says a lot in itself.
That's a long time.
That's important. Well, thanks. Take care.
Okay.
We're going to do a special now.
Okay.
A 10-minute special. I might just do it on the same platform.